Well, tēnā koe te rangatira, e whai wā ki te kōrero ki a mātou mō tēnei kaupapa hohonu, kaupapa mamai, whakahirahira hoki. I wondered if we can start with, tell us about this relationship between Kingitanga and Governor Grey.
It's an interesting story, actually, to understand his relationship. Probably need to understand the relationship he had with his father, Te Whirowhiro. In the early years of Matutaira, so that was his second name, Tukaroto, Matutaira, then Tawhiao. So in the early years, there was an incident that took place where Governor Grey was quite active in his life. And Matutaira stole from his father. And his father pursued him, actually, to discipline him. And Matutaira hid in the kauta. Because Te Whirowhiro was that tapu, he couldn't enter into the kauta. And so when he found his opportunity, Tawhiao Matutaira dashed out, and he ended up with Governor Grey, Kawe Island, for a week. When he returned with Governor Grey, Te Whirowhiro and Governor Grey decided to banish him for 6 months. And so Tawhiao had to go and stay with Governor Grey for 6 months as a young man. And so he was active in that relationship. And so it started from there. Governor Grey also, when he was in the presence of Queen Victoria, she asked Governor Grey, who in New Zealand has the most power to be king? And Governor Grey offered up Te Whirowhiro's name. So she said, this is in 1845, when you return to New Zealand as the governor, be quick to set Te Whirowhiro up as king of Aotearoa. And that was the origins of the Kingitanga. So he did that. 1849, Governor Grey pleaded for Te Whirowhiro to protect Auckland. So he signed an agreement, I think they call it the Military Protection Agreement, 1849. Governor Grey was reposted out to Africa, South Africa. Now, what eventuated after that was actually the development of the Kingitanga, the movement there. They had 8 particular meetings within Waikato itself. And there, our rangatira started to turn towards British power and swear allegiance that way. And this is all part and parcel of the actual invasion itself. These were the signs that our people were getting, that our chiefs were moving away. And there's some haka that kind of express those movements of our people. So there was a time where we believe that in the 1860s, prior to Governor Grey being reappointed in 1861 for his second term as governor, that prior to Te Whirowhiro passing in Aroa here, they had a meeting to which the story evolves, and that's the story of Te Whirowhiro being asked by Governor Grey to abdicate from his position. And that story goes like this. Old man, says Governor Grey, do away with your kingship or I shall wage war against you. And Te Whirowhiro's response was, I can't do that, Grey, for this king movement does not belong to me, it belongs to all the chiefs of Aotearoa. I'll wage war against you for 7 years or more, says Grey, until you are no more. And then Potato says, and I will resist you. I will resist you for 8 years, for 9 years or more. You see, we won't go away. And then Governor Grey's response was, old man, I have a cow. I have a cow with extensive progeny. When I release my cows into your land, it will drink of all your waterways until it's all dried up. And the old man, Te Whirowhiro, responded by saying, it may be partly true if it's merely rain. It's formed in the clouds, soon to fall to the ground to form puddles, only to be dried up by the sun. Then maybe your cows could drink of all our waterways. Old man, how will you survive? What will you eat? Says Governor Gray. The old man started to name native plants, te para, will consume the para, the mamaku, will be sustained by the fruits of our forests. And then Governor Gray says to him, when all that food is gone, old man, what will you eat then? Te Whirowhiro looked into his eyes, staring at him, and says, you. I'll eat you. That story leads up to a soured relationship between Tawhiao and Governor Gray, because Tawhiao felt betrayed by Governor Gray, given that his father protected Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, in 1849. And so not long after, Te Whirowhiro passed away, and 2 years later, a couple of years later, Governor Gray opens up his gates to his farm and allows 1,400 cows to come through into Waikato to invade Waikato. And basically, that's how that story goes. There was a time in 1863, around January, where Governor Gray made an unannounced visit to Ngāroa Wāhia, searching for Tawhiao. He wasn't there, he was at Hangatiki. So he planned to move on to Taupiri, and he had an audience with Tarapipipi, to which Tarapipipi asked Governor Gray, do you still oppose the King movement? To which Governor Gray responded by saying, I will not fight against him with my sword, but rather I will dig around him until he falls of his own accord. Which are motions of premeditated, that's all premeditated, all this invasion. There was a deliberate act of terrorism, if I can explain it that way. And then what unfolded from there was the invasion.
So it's quite symbolic crossing the Mangatawhiri River then, isn't it? He knew what he was up to. Do you think so?
Oh, absolutely. Governor Gray was warned by Te Whirowhiro, you stay on that side of the Mangatawhiri River and I'll remain on this side. Should you breach that line, you would have declared war. And Tawhiao, he reaffirmed the statement of his father. When they crossed the Rārangi Aukati, that's what they call it, we have a tikanga called Pike Hawani. And Pike Hawani is a broken truce. So he did it deliberately, broke that line and declared war.
When Governor Gray said he would dig around him till he fell, how do you translate that? It
was clearly making a stating his primary objective. And in our eyes, his primary objective was to annihilate. So in the kōrero of Te Whirowhiro and Governor Gray, Governor Gray makes these suggestions and he says, do away with the kingship or I'll wage war against you, which is a terrorist act. Then he says he'll send his cows to drink of all your waterways, so he's going to dispossess them. And then he says, I'll starve you to death. Those are deliberate acts of terrorism. That's what I think. So the primary driver under all of that is the annihilation, to acquire complete sovereignty under the British rule. That's what he meant. The land and the invasion was secondary. The primary driver of his kōrero was, I'll dig around you till you fall of your own accord. It's just like when they wrote in the proclamation, the Pānui, they sent their Pānui out to our people in South Auckland. I'm sure I can recite part of that. Where the Pānui says, to the natives who reside in the Manukau district and the Waikato frontier, you are hereby required immediately to take your oath of allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen, and to give up your arms to an officer appointed by the government for that purpose. Natives that comply with this order will be protected. However, natives who refuse are hereby warned to leave the district aforementioned and retire beyond Waikato past the Mangatawhiri River, or you will be ejected. Ejected. And when they translated that into reo Māori, I think the last sentence is, ki te kore rātau e rongo, ka tono atu rātau kia haere. Ki te kore rātau e rongo, ka tono atu rātau kia haere. Now, the main language spoken back then was te reo Māori, not English. There's a distinct difference between, if you don't comply with this order, we'll ask you to leave. Rather use the language, if you don't comply with this order, you will be ejected. Ejected is another name for annihilation. So that's the primary focus of his intent when he stated those words. I will dig around you until you fall of your own accord. I will dig around you until you exist no further. That's what that is.
When the soldiers did cross the Mangatawhiri, how did Waikato iwi ready themselves?
I think they were well prepared for this. And they knew that sooner or later an invasion was going to take place. The government was probably, I don't know if you call it clever, but they were cunning in the way that they placed certain people in certain parts of Waikato. So I know that in a year prior to the invasion, that a Lieutenant Bates is his name, it's his Māori name, Te Pōti, Te Pēti, that's a Te Pēti Bates. He went to visit one of his, I call him a spy, I don't know if that's the right word. He was located at our papakainga, Tūpekerangi. Tūpekerangi is about 3 miles prior to, located just before Rangiriri. He was going down there, he came across some Māori who heard about this man, Te Pēti. And in one of our haka, goes like this. Kingitanga ki runga o te pewhairangi. Ui rongo o te pēti, e aki ana e. Ui nāwa, yaki ana e. As I return from the Bay of Islands southwards, make my way to Tūpekerangi. Your fame, Te Pēti, has been heard like waves crashing on the coast. And that particular day, he visited a man called Hare Te Mokena, Harry Morgan, whose role was to identify key parasites, key waterways, key resources, levels of ammunition, how large the war parties were, and feed that information back to Governor Graham, to Cameron and so forth. So they were prepared. They were digging a year prior to the invasion. So we understand that prior to Governor Gray returning, they were going to invade in 1861. So as they sent people down to gather intelligence, we had our own intelligence and we were prepared. So they prepared for Rangiriri in particular in hapu structures that they would bring. So our hapus, they operated on different wakataua that will come up from here, Wāhi Pā, Ngāti Tamaoho, and come down and work in groups to dig. Now a lot of our women did a lot of the digging, and our kids, and they were prevalent in terms of establishing and constructing this Parasite. So that's how they did it. They had pā, te teo pā, Koheroa, Mere, and then Rangiriri, the main fortification.
So they were the, if you like, the workers that would come down the river on their waka to take part in moving all the earthworks.
Yeah.
Who was the architect of the Parasite there?
The architect of the Parasite is Te Ahorangi Te Wharepu, no Ngāti Mahuta. He was of age then, and he's the one that designed the actual Parasite. He was present at Rua Pika Pika, and we understand that some of the concepts from Rua Pika Pika was brought down from there and incorporated and enhanced here at Rangiriri.
Can you describe that pa? Because it's not like Rua Pika Pika in terms of a fighting pa, which is a rectangle or anything like that. It's a long pa that has swamps at one end and a lake at the other. Was that on purpose?
But our stories say that the philosophy of the actual construction of the pa was constructed based on the life cycle of a tuna. So our kai, our tino kai here in Rangiriri, or in the salt Waikato areas, tuna puhi, the silver belly eel. And so the extraordinary thing about our people that they know the environment, they know the animals that reside in the environment, and they can manifest and you know, almost become the bird or the taniwha or the tuna. And so he constructed the space on that. You know, if you didn't know, the slime of a tuna allows the tuna to live outside of the water. It's not just the slime that's there to protect the tuna itself. It makes your hands dirty, but the slime of it protects and allows the tuna to breathe on land. Tuna can also burrow into ground, and tuna, when one pool of water dries up, it can walk across land to find another pool of water. And so when you look at the construction of Rangiriri, from one waterway to the next, when you look at how it's constructed, as a tuna, karo tino moe ātengo o te noki haere of the tuna, but you'll see that the shape of some of the gun holes is like a tuna. Okay. Another key aspect of the philosophy of this particular Parasite is that they dug 2 ditches, and it was, you know, it was so profound that from the waterway and from a frontal attack, the British troops could not decipher what it actually really looked like. And so they built and dug that deep, 4.5 metres deep. Okay. Now, if you didn't know, a tuna can actually scale a wall higher than 6 metres actually. And what we believe is that our tupuna understood the life cycle of a tuna and how it would survive on land, and constructed parts of the fortification as if they were a tuna.
And that would be why there was an escape route out the back door.
Well, that's quite interesting, because it was Māori that were being pursued by the troops. And so if you look at it through you know, the context of war, the British troops, their intent was just to straight through, kill, annihilate everything in front of them. They didn't have to have, it was only either advance forward or retreat. That's it. One way in, one way out. But when you're talking about Māori protecting the livelihood of their people, they had to consider multiple strategies. So how do you stop the troop from entering into the pa? Using deceitful measures. They also, and then should things worsen in the pa, how would you escape? And so they had to have multiple escape routes. One of the main escape routes was the eastern route to our lake, originally called Te Karaka. But from the time of battle, it was called Kopuera. And so that was the main escape route that they took through the eastern link to the lake.
How long did the battle last at Rangiriri, and what happened there? Where did they come? Did they come on the water, or did they come on the land?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. History through the British eyes tells you it lasted for less than 24 hours. started in the afternoon and the flag was raised 5 o'clock the next morning. But our people believe that actually the invasion started around the 18th, so 3 days prior. So it went across 3 to 4 days, not one day, 3 to 4 days. And that's how long we believe that the war or the invasion took place. Now, history is interesting because we believe that they omitted a lot of their faults that occurred that particular day. And I don't know why. Yeah.
How did the fighting power work? You know, how did it work? Was it a great defence for some part of the war?
We believe it was extraordinary. I mean, had they had the same ammunition, the same artillery, we could have held off the troops for a number of days, a number of weeks even. I mean, if you consider the invasion in itself, I think one thing that we had on top of them was a greater understanding of our environment. Yeah. So we weren't equipped with the same amount of ammunition or guns. So we had tūpara, which are old double-barrel guns. You know, they had revolvers, they had hand grenades, they had cannons. Even to survive 24 hours is amazing. However, I think we don't value our indigenous intelligence enough. And I think it's because of the indigenous intelligence of our people that we were able to survive for that long with that invasion.
Architects like Te Wharepū would never have come across gunboats, but at Rangiriri there were gunboats. How did they work? How did it go down? Were they surprised, do you think?
We understand that Governor Gray at some point of time between 1861 and 1863 that he started to boast about having a steamer come from Sydney. And so our people just had to prepare themselves. And I think there was enough intelligence around to actually understand what that might look like. Albeit they didn't have the artillery to, sink the ship or whatever. But I'm not quite sure in that sense on how they figured out what these boats would potentially look like. Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
There is two stories or two versions of the story of the white flag. Tell me what you know of the white flag situation.
I think one thing about our ancestors is that even in times of disaster, they maintain their values. And the values and get my words together. Yeah, I suppose in times of devastation they maintain their values.
The British said that Māori raised the flag in defeat.
Yeah.
What do you believe?
Yeah, we understand that. There's another story about one of our kuia who has a different story about the flags. And this is why we believe that the invasion took 3 to 4 days. This kuia, Pare Te Putu, in her narrative, she talks about a red flag and a white flag. And the red flag was raised in the morning at 8 o'clock each morning. And that was an indicator that no war would take place. And that at 12 o'clock, that a white flag would be raised. And that gave both sides an hour to get food, to get water, to reshuffle themselves and get themselves organised. And then at 1 o'clock, the red flag was raised again. In times of devastation, our people know how to operate on values. And we believe that they witnessed a white flag on one of the boats and thought that they would, in turn, raise a white flag to enter into negotiations on how they might advance from that point onwards. I believe that our ancestors operated based on ethics Because in this queer story too, she talks about there was a time where the British troops were shifting a boat. It was right under the line of sight of our ancestors. They could have kind of picked them off one by one. But our ancestors says, karakau ngā rātou pū, taiho kia tai ki tērā taha, kia whai pū ai rātou, kātai ka timata anō. They have no ammunition that we can see, so allow them to relocate and then we'll commence war again. And we believe, based on ethics, based on whakapono, based on values, as Māori, that we were tricked into the notion that we would enter into an amicable discussion to see how we might either conclude at that particular point. But what eventuated from that was, again, an act of terrorism where they were incarcerated, 183 of them.
And killed others who were fleeing.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. That was the result of that. And so I keep saying that this is an invasion and it's an act of terrorism. Because terrorism is defined as basically armed conflict. And as a result of armed conflict, you've had deaths, seriously bodily harm, you had your economy smashed, you had your environmental space damaged, you had sites of significance demolished. And the harm that was brought to our people was just a terrible act of terrorism, that's all I can say.
So some of your best fighting men, if we were to believe the story of the troops, put up the white flag and went off to be prisoners of war. Is that hard for you to fathom?
If I return to the original intent, that annihilation was the primary driver of the invasion, I'm not surprised that that happened. Whether or not that's reflected in the British and Irish immigrants today is a different story, but the British and Irish immigrants of that particular time clearly had no ethics, clearly understood their instruction to annihilate anything that comes into their pathway, whether it be women, whether it be children, whether it be men, and that's what they did. Again, our ancestors operated on their values. Aroha ki te tangata a kua kowai.
And it was women and children. Can you tell us the reason that the lake was called Kōpuera?
It's a simple translation as those are guns. And Kōpuera today is another mass grave for us. So there are three. There's one in the local cemetery. We believe that some of our ancestors are still buried in the ground, the remnants of the current Parasite, and at the bottom of the lake, or even in the water, in the river. And that's what Kōpuera, its original name, Te Karaka. Now, that escape route, the eastern escape route is, we've named a carving there called Te Pāhuatanga o Te Karaka, and that carving is located on our battle site today. It, translated is the atrocities of Te Karaka, because that's where our women and children were gunned down. It's where they were, hand grenades were thrown at them while they were escaping. Now, one of my ancestors, which was the wife of Te Wharepu, tana ingoa ko Waimanapuku. Our kuia is my great-great-great-grandmother. She was part of the Taranaki battles, Waikato and Taranaki, and she was offered as a tatau pounamu, a token of peace. Taranaki gave her to Wharepu at the age of 18. And my kuia come into Waikato and lived there. She was in charge of looking after a group of wahine and children. And so while she was escaping, she was shot in her pukowhiwhi. entered into water but managed to get to the other side of the lake. Today she's buried on one of the points, the urupa there, called Te Kotiariki. And back home we have a story about a Taranaki princess. And this Taranaki princess, her name is Waimanapuku, Te Pereniki, who is the wife, one of the wives of Te Wharepu there.
What happened to some of those women and children that were escaping? Would they have been sent, as they realised that it had fallen, would they have been told to escape?
It just tells you about Māori society in general, the importance of, future generations. So in order to sustain our lives as Māori, the first priority were the women and the children. The men were all right, so they were instructed to depart. And unfortunately, in one of the instances that one of the cannons struck one of the waka to which our women and children were on, split it in half. It was a waka made out of kahikatea. So our ancestors didn't just die from shots and hand grenades, but they drowned at the same time. So I think the message there is that we understand the importance of survivability, of sustainability, and to sustain ourselves as a people, the priority were the women and the children to vacate. There is a saying that afterwards, down in Horako, there's that saying that ki te mate ngā tāne me mate hoki ngā wāhine me ngā tamariki. When Tāwhia was there at Rangiriri, he instructed our people not to fight, actually to go inland, go into the forests. Te Wharepu said to him, this is what Te Wharepu says, ki te rere te toto, me rere I runga I tō mātou whenua ake. If blood is to be shed, let it be shed on our own land. Kāre mātou e whakai. We disagree with you, King. We will remain here, we will fight. Ka wehe te kini, ka noho mai te iwi ki kona.
I guess, someone from here who's a holder of these stories, a historian, an iwi historian, what do you believe the impact of rangiriri has been on your people?
Yeah, the impact is severe and it's intergenerational. It's caused intergenerational trauma. It's, we've been dispossessed from our taonga, everything. And it aligns to their primary objective, is to wipe us off the face of the earth. This is what it's caused. Albeit they failed in their attempt to do so, which is captured in Te Wherowhero's kōrero, who says that despite the odds to survive, hea koa he wai e kapua pai ki te rangi te whenua, ka horo wai ho puapua ka mimiti. Ngari waikato, e wai mana wa whenua tuhatua, e kore mimiti mutunga kore e. My people come from a wellspring deep in the earth. We will not dry up. Here we are talking today. We are the manifestation of that prophecy of his, that despite the odds to survive against the latest artillery of the world, at that particular time, we are here. So it's been devastating. It's not just isolated to Waikato, but all Māori tribes throughout the world are dispossessed. Now, we call this invasion constitutional murder and constitutional rape, constitutional confiscation. And I think that's the damage that's been caused. There's so much, it's so broad. But it hasn't knocked us out. They were unsuccessful in annihilating us. It's a harsh word to use, but it's reality. The act of terrorism, driven by a desire to annihilate, to acquire full and total sovereignty under the British rule, was it? And here we are today.
What does te Kingitanga mean to Waikato and Maniapoto tribes?
The Kingitanga was built on unification, unity. People can describe it as a ray of hope, you know. But it's a movement, more than a movement, that solidified relationships between, you know. And people get this part wrong. We are not the Kingitanga, all the other iwi that swore allegiance to the King movement. We are mainly guardians of the kingship. And so I acknowledge all the other tribes that came through, from Taranaki, Ngāti Ranginui, Tū Hoi, Tū Wharetoa, all those iwi that participated here at Rangiriri, acknowledge them. So our view of the Kingitanga back then and our view of it today is exactly the same thing, is that this is a movement of unification. And it's because of the King movement that we have survived this brutal attack on our people. I think that's the main point there. That's what we think it is.
By telling this story, what would you like Pākehā New Zealand to learn from it?
To know that this isn't a fairy tale. This isn't a fairy tale that you teach in kindergartens, but rather it's an authentic, true reflection of their ancestors, or those that have genealogical ties to the immigrants of the time. You know? So one, this isn't a fairy tale. Two, it's empowering to understand the complexities of today's society. But in order to understand the complexities of today's society, is you need to know the past. Let us not dwell in the past, but take the learnings from the past to make us better citizens of today. You know, I suppose the importance of telling our stories is for non-Māori and Māori to truly understand the impact of the invasion. And don't be shy to talk about it. I think this is why I've purposely said an act of terrorism, and then, you know, driven by a desire to annihilate us. And I think that if we understand, if our understanding is enhanced by telling these stories, then we can live in unity moving forward. Okay, we don't want to perpetuate the ill feelings. No, I don't have ill feelings. As I sit here and tell the story, you know, I'm not hating on non-Māori. I'm basically retelling a true story in the hope that their understanding, their comprehension of why Māori are the way they are today, that they're a bit more enlightened on the subject matter.
What does reconciliation look like to you?
No amount of money or apologies or change in legislation would ever suffice to reconciliate the past. But reconciliation, to me personally, is asking non-Māori to have a heart, to have an open mind, and to accept the truth of the invasion of our people. It doesn't require money to reconciliate. We can reconciliate within. It's about opening up our hearts, caring for each other, and just living as one. That's what it really looks like. That, and in addition to that, I suppose it's around looking at strategies that will stop the perpetuation of acts that suppress the ability of our tamariki to grow, to be Māori, to feel Māori. And just that should be the norm. We are the mainstream. Māori is the mainstream. No matter how you look at us, we are mainstream. It's not non-Māori ways, it's not Western ways of thinking or doing, it's Māori ways. If we ever get to that stage, well, ka pai. Pai anō. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it is a difficult question to answer.
It is. Rawe, what? Beautiful.